Chapter 542. What is the other thing? What other thing? Hong Fui, don't pretend to be confused. You obviously know what I am asking you about. Oh? The man dragged out a long sound, calmly raised his eyebrows and looked at her. That one? How is the investigation going? What is the identity of the mysterious woman behind Ro Air? How did you know that I was going to tell you this? To be honest, when he heard Shin Yueji's question, Hong Fui was quite surprised. He said that he had something to tell Shan Yueji, but he did not mention this. How could she guess it? Looking at his strange expression, Shan Yueji snorted. Before Mo Wushang left, I specifically asked him to help me investigate this matter. He cares about me so much, so he must have put my matter first. Speaking of this, she was quite proud. Coincidentally, he asked you to stay. One of the reasons was to protect me, and the other was to help investigate the mysterious woman, right? You're smart. It seems that you're not without some redeeming qualities. Forget it. Since you have already guessed it, I will not keep you in suspense. I did find out a little about the identity of the mysterious woman behind Lu Qingru, but unfortunately what? Don't worry, Lu Qingru really did not lie to you. That woman does have some background, as if she knew that I was going to investigate her, so she was already on guard. Did you see her? The man touched his nose. You can say that. In the beginning, he was following behind the woman. He boasted about his qinggong and thought that he could secretly follow the woman and find out some information about her. Who knew that this woman was really smart? It was as if she knew that he was secretly following her. She played the game of the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind it. Not only did he fail to follow her, but he was also almost plotted against by the villain behind him. Looking at the man's embarrassed expression, Shin Yueji vaguely guessed something. After all this time, you were plotted against by that woman? Pfft. What nonsense are you talking about? Only I can plot against others, and no one else can plot against me. Did you find out where that woman came from? I don't know about your Feng Nation's matters, but I'm very clear about my North Seas matters. There used to be a mysterious organization in the northern underworld. It was said that it had been passed down for nearly 100 years. Oh, I already knew who that woman was, but the man who fought with me afterward, I can confirm that he was from the Dark North Kingdom. Moreover, it was the Xinming cult that had been rumored in the Jianghu for a long time. It was rumored that the mysterious dark sect had an evil technique that could divide a person's body into different shapes and appearances. When I was fighting with that man, he suddenly transformed into 6 different figures. Even the real person disappeared among the 6 figures, making it difficult to distinguish between the real and the fake. You're from the Northern Dark Kingdom? Shin Yueji was confused. If they are from the North Underworld, why would they come to the Feng Nation? How would I know? However, the black-clothed man's martial arts and moves were indeed the methods that the Northern Underworld Xinming sect used. It was rumored that the Xinming sect was mysterious and liked to cover their faces with veils. No one has ever seen their true faces. Bide 1. Chapter 543. In addition, when I fought with them, the methods and skills they used against me were definitely them. As for why Brimming would appear, we need to think about it further. I will discuss it with Mo Wushang when he returns. After all, the people from the Xinming sect never asked about the affairs of the Jianghu. They did not even ask about the affairs of the imperial court. Moreover, they came all the way from the North Underworld to the Feng Kingdom. You mentioned the Xinming sect just now. What kind of organization is it? Shin Yueji was deep in thought as she recalled what he had just said. They are just some crooked sects in the Jianghu. They are paid to do things for others. However, the Xinming sect is different from other sections. They only do things based on their mood. If it is really like what you said, and they are from the North Underworld, why would they come all the way to the Feng Kingdom? To help Lu Qingru? Are you sure that the person from the Huayang Palace told you the truth? The answer was unquestionable. Shin Yueji frowned. I believe in Ro Air. She would not lie to me. Everything she had done was for her. For her, she had implicated her own family. For her, she had abandoned everything she had. She had never regretted it, and had never regretted it. How could a woman who was so sincere to her lie to her? Didn't you say that the Xinming sect's whereabouts have always been strange? Even when they do things for others, it depends on their mood. Even so, Lu Qingru is from the Feng Kingdom. If Lu Qingru had nothing to do with the Xinming sect, would the Xinming sect care so much? Did they come all the way to help her? The only thing that can be said is that Lu Qingru's identity is not simple. Compared to what Hong Fui said, Xin Yueji did not want to believe that Lu Qingru would lie to her. Are you sure? The man sneered. What do you think I am? This young master's investigations are always accurate and never wrong. Although the people from the Xinming sect are mysterious, it is not like I have no dealings with them. I have also seen them work for others and use their cloning martial arts. Fighting with them in the Huayang Palace today is definitely not wrong. Forget it, I didn't find much. Since I promised that guy to help you investigate that woman, I'll definitely get to the bottom of it. As for Lu Qingru, I remember reminding you a long time ago that this woman is not a good person. You'd better stay away from her. Xin Yueji suddenly fell silent. Perhaps he was used to her disobeying him no matter what, but her sudden silence made him feel a little uncomfortable. He thought she was worried about him. Don't worry. With me here, the Huayang Palace won't be able to hurt you. Even if their leader comes, I will protect you until Imo Wushang returns, let alone the Xinming sect. I will continue to investigate Huayang Palace. Sooner or later, I will find out Lu Qingru's identity. It wasn't just to help Shan Yueji. Hong Fui suddenly realized that he seemed to be quite interested in that person from the Huayang Palace. This woman was really not simple. No wonder she could hold the appetite of so many men. Even when he found out about it, he originally planned to be a guest behind the curtain. In the end, he gave up on the idea. He did not want to have a direct conflict with Feng Juqing, this meticulous emperor, for the time being. Read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, The Regent, Messing with the Body Claw Bookhouse, for free. Chapter 544. The Imperial Study. Li Yingying didn't see the guards outside. Originally, she was thinking about what reason to go in, but when she saw that it was as quiet as before, she couldn't help feeling happy. Holding the plate of pastries, she carefully pushed open the door to the Imperial Study. Before she came, she specially went back to her residence and changed into a beautiful dress. The clothes of palace maids were all the same. When she was concubine Ying, she also had a few beautiful clothes, but not many. In just a few days, she rushed them out. After she was demoted by the emperor, those gorgeous clothes were also taken away. She lowered her head and looked at the white dress she was wearing. It was simple and elegant. She didn't put much makeup on her face because Xin Yueji once said that the emperor didn't like women with heavy makeup. In addition, the former empress was a beautiful person. She was somewhat similar to the former empress. The less makeup she put on, the more she looked like her. The moment she pushed open the door, Li Yingying panicked. Her heart almost jumped out of her chest. At this moment, she and the emperor were only separated by a door. After this door was opened, she could see the emperor she yearned for day and night. Speaking of which, she hadn't seen him for more than a day, but she felt that a long time had passed. From when he was an imperial concubine to when he was demoted, she thought that there would be no connection between them. Since she was young, she had lived in hatred. She didn't know the taste of love between a man and a woman, let alone the taste of liking someone. She also didn't know why her mother fell in love with that beast in human clothing without any regrets. She couldn't understand what was so good about that man that made her mother dig out her heart and lungs to be with him. Even if he treated her so cruelly, she still loved him without any regrets. Now, Li Yingying finally knew this feeling. This feeling was really wonderful. If one didn't truly love someone, they would never know this feeling and experience this kind of feeling. She treated the emperor like this. As long as she thought that if she could stay by his side forever, even if she died, she wouldn't have any regrets. Even if for him, she had to give up some things and become enemies with the whole world. She would also give up everything and abandon everything for him. Perhaps this was the feeling of loving someone. This was also the reason why her mother loved that man so firmly in the past. Li Yingying felt like there was a heavy rock pressing down on her feet. She carefully pushed the door open, not daring to look inside. She carefully pushed the door open, lowered her head, and took small steps forward. The imperial study was very quiet. It was her first time coming to this kind of place. She thought to herself, perhaps this was where the emperor worked. It was so quiet, and there was an invisible majesty to it. She could not hear any sound, but according to the palace maid, there must be someone in the imperial study. Your Majesty, this servant heard that your headache is acting up again. This servant's heart is not good, so I came to have a look. She was afraid that she was too obvious, so she hurriedly changed her words. It was imperial concubine who asked this servant to come first. She said that it was still early, and she was worried that I would disturb your majesty's work, so she asked this servant to come to see your majesty first, to see if your majesty is all right. Speaking of this, she carefully raised her head with a happy expression. However, the moment she raised her head, she could no longer smile, because she didn't see the man she wanted to see. Right in front of her lay a woman whose limbs had been amputated quietly. Bidwan read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, the Prince Regent, Provoking the Body Claw Bookhouse, for free. Chapter 545. She was completely frozen on the spot as she looked at the woman's face that was almost similar to hers. It was a familiar face and the same elegant attire. Even their figures were almost the same. However, all four of her limbs were destroyed, and even her head was separated from the piece of flesh on her neck. Each separated bone was only a finger's distance away from each other. It was like pulling up a seedling to help it grow. It was terrifying and chilling to look at. In an instant, a chill ran through her entire body and spread to her limbs and bones. Li Yingying had never been so afraid before. If it was said that the unimaginable rumors in the harem only made her feel a lingering fear in her heart, then now, what she saw in the imperial study made her eyes widen. Not only was she unable to move, her pair of beautiful eyes looked as if they had been plucked out, fixated on the female corpse in front of her. So similar. How could it be so similar? Who was she? Who was she? Why was she here? In the imperial study? In the emperor's place? Where was the emperor? Where did the emperor go? Where were the guards and servants of the imperial study? Where did they go? Where did they go? Why weren't they here? Tears slid down Li Yingying's pale cheeks. She could no longer move her feet. She didn't even know when the plate in her hand had fallen to the ground. The plate that fell to the ground broke into pieces. Even the pastries on it rolled on the ground, covered in dust. It was a mess. She didn't know if it was because the woman was lying on the ground that scared her. Li Yingying panicked. She wanted to run, but she realized that she couldn't move her feet at all. She wanted to scream, but her throat was dry. She couldn't even cry, let alone scream. She could only gasp for air. There was nothing more difficult for her to accept than seeing a woman who looked like her dismembered and exposed in front of her. To her, the female corpse in front of her was so terrifying. It was because this face was 90% similar to hers that she was even more afraid. Is there anyone? Is there anyone? She screamed hysterically in her heart for help. Who could save her? Who could come and save her? She didn't know how much she regretted it. If she had known, she wouldn't have made the decision to come here. If she had known. Suddenly, she thought, how could the Empress be so kind as to give such a good opportunity to accompany the Emperor to Guifei Nyang? Perhaps she was secretly making things difficult for them, and her goal was to frame Imperial Consort Nyang? But since it was to frame Imperial Concubine Shun, why did he bring out a woman who looked exactly like him? A thought flashed through her mind. She was the former Empress? When she met Shin Yueji for the first time, she told her that she took her to the palace to deal with the Empress, just because she had a face similar to the late Empress. Then this one. She looked at the woman who was lying there quietly as if she was asleep. If she hadn't known that she had been dead for a long time, if she hadn't known that her 5 limbs had been dismembered, she would have thought that she had fallen asleep. She slept so quietly, so calmly, like a pale beauty in a painting. No one could bear to disturb her. She was the late Empress, but Li Yingying could finally move. She staggered back a little, but her eyes were still fixed on the female corpse in front of her. Wasn't she already submerged in the lake? The body sank in South Lake, and its face was covered with countless nails. It was reasonable to say that her body should be in South Lake. Read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, the Regent, Messing with Claw Bookhouse, for free. Chapter 546. Her face should be full of nails. After a few months, even if the body didn't rot, the fish in the water should have decomposed her body. How could she appear in the imperial study and in front of the emperor unscathed? Also, she covered her face and let out an earth-shattering scream. It was true. The rumors in the harem were true. Now the only thing she could explain was that the rumors in the harem were true. It was not a rumor. The ghost of the former empress had come back to take revenge. She was back. Li Yingying was so scared that her face turned pale and her lips trembled. She knelt down with a plop. "Your Highness, I didn't mean to offend you. I really didn't mean to offend you. Please forgive me, Your Highness. I'll go now, I'll go now." She got up from the ground in a panic, rolling and crawling as she tried to run out. However, before she could reach the door, the empty door behind her suddenly closed by itself with a pack. It was so fast that it seemed that someone had left a lock outside. At this time, Li Yingying's heart was full of fear. She didn't even dare to look back at the body. She was afraid that if she looked back, she would see the woman crawling up with her teeth and claws and pouncing on her. Li Yingying cried out loud. She covered her mouth and kept banging on the closed door. "Is anyone there? Is anyone there? Please, let me out. Who closed the door? Please, I have no grudge against you. Why do you want to hurt me? Let me out, I beg you. I beg you." Sob, sob. She couldn't die. She couldn't die yet. She hadn't taken revenge. She couldn't die. Regret and remorse ran through Li Yingying's whole body and mind. Now she finally realized the mistake she had made. She didn't know whether she was in a dream or reality. She didn't know whether it was the ghost of the former empress who was causing trouble, or it was a play by the empress. The only thing she realized was that the person who should have been here was Shun Yueji, not her. It was the empress who asked Shun Yueji to accompany the emperor. She said she would come later. She wanted to take this opportunity to return to the emperor's side. She wanted to continue to climb to the position of second concubine Ing. She wanted, but she never thought that her desire to see the emperor would be completely destroyed and she would encounter such a situation. There was a sudden movement behind him. It was as if someone had gotten out of bed, and the simple wooden bed made a creaking sound. The conjectures in his heart finally came true. The woman who was supposed to be lying on the ground with her 5 limbs dismembered came back to life. She was walking towards him. Even if Li Yingying didn't look back, she knew that the corpse was walking towards her. The spacious imperial study was no longer as silent as before. This time, there was finally a sound. The only sound was Li Yingying's crying and the whimpering that came from her mouth. It was especially ear-piercing and frightening. Li Yingying didn't dare to look back, but the current situation didn't allow her to do so. She didn't know how the door of the imperial study was closed, but no matter how hard she tried, the wooden door didn't move at all. It was like a hard stone that she couldn't push at all. She was afraid and turned around carefully. When she saw that the woman who had been lying on the ground had already come down, her 5 scattered limbs were swaying as if they were about to fall off. Chapter 547. She could clearly see that on the corpse, there were dense and messy stitches. Each of her arms was stitched up with a needle and thread, hanging down. Her head was crooked, swaying as she walked towards her. Even the silver thread couldn't stitch up her swaying head. She saw with her own eyes that Gu Yueqin's head, from the back, fell to the front as she walked forward, spinning in front of her chest. She also saw with her own eyes that her head, from the front, fell to the right, then to the left. Her eyes looked as if they had been scalded. There was only black without any white edges. Her mouth was slightly open, but there was no tongue inside. Countless worms crawled out of her mouth and fell to the ground. The worms crawled very quickly, even faster than she walked. After they fell to the ground, they all crawled towards her one after another. Li Yingying was so scared that she almost lost her voice. She took out a wooden board from somewhere and slapped the worms with all her might. The worms seemed endless, and no matter how much strength she exerted, the flattened worms would only lie on the ground for a while before coming back to life. Li Yingying cried as she watched the worms crawling towards her body. She dodged and ran in all directions. And from Gu Yueqin's mouth, there were even more worms crawling out. Li Yingying was really scared, so scared that she didn't know what to do. She could only focus her attention on Gu Yueqin. She didn't care who she was, didn't care if she offended her, and didn't know why she was here. She only knew that she was scared. If she didn't retaliate, she would be the one to die. She didn't want to die. She wanted revenge. She didn't want to die for no reason. She grabbed the wooden board in her hands and suddenly pounced towards her corpse. I don't care if you're a human or a ghost. I don't think I've offended you, but you want to kill me. I'll kill you. Li Yingying smashed the wooden plank on the top of the female corpse's head. Immediately, a large hole appeared on the top of the female corpse's head. After all, she had been dead for a long time. The structure of her body was destined to be inferior to that of a living person. Even if it was a light blow, her rotting body would split open. Moreover, Li Yingying smashed the wooden plank with such force. Then, Li Yingying saw a slit in Gu Yueqin's brain, from which she could vaguely see the rotting organs. It was disgusting and terrifying. She was so scared that she immediately let go of the wooden board in her hands and kept retreating. How could this be? How could this be? It really was the late Empress. She was now certain that it was the late Empress. She was clearly dead, and there were no signs of life in her body. Why? Why could she still stand up? Why could she still attack her? While Li Yingying was in a daze, Gu Yueqin suddenly stretched out her hands. Her fingers were so cold that they seemed to have just come out from an ice coffin. It was so cold that it could freeze people. The suffocating pain made Li Yingying's face pale. She started to struggle with all her might. But how could her weak strength compare to a dead person? Even a living person would know that her blows and bites would cause pain. Chapter 548. However, the woman in front of her was a dead person. She had been dead for a long time, and her body had long since decayed. She couldn't laugh, feel pain, or feel pain. No matter how hard she tried, how hard she struggled, she would not have any reaction. She just wanted to kill her. This was the first time Li Yingying sized up a dead person at such a close distance. She could finally understand why people weren't afraid of anyone when they were alive, but when they died, even their loved ones would feel fear. It was because the appearance of a dead person was really terrifying. She was the opposite of everything when she was alive. Her eyeballs were all black. She didn't have a tongue. Nothing at all. It was so terrifying. Her whole body seemed to be wrapped in a layer of ice. The coldness from her whole body made her feel the chill penetrating her limbs and bones. It was so horrifying. Sob, sob, sob. She wanted to struggle and ask for help, but the sound that came out was bursts of sobs. It was as if her throat was being choked. The strength and range of her struggle slowly decreased, and even her vision began to blur. Li Yingying thought that she was going to die. She planned to quietly welcome the arrival of death, but when she really gave up struggling and was ready to accept her fate, the strength that was choking her neck suddenly decreased a lot. She took this opportunity and finally broke free from her hand. She saw Gu Yueqin stagger a few steps back. The dismembered body that seemed to be hanging on her body swayed left and right. The head that had finally stood on her neck fell again, and the silver thread pulled a long distance. She couldn't care about anything else. She clenched her last breath of strength, picked up the board that she had just thrown away from the ground, and smashed it hard on her. Whether it was her head or her body, she seemed to have gone crazy, smashing and kicking with all her strength. There were traces of wetness on her hands. She lowered her head and saw that it was blood, red blood. The dark red blood almost stung her eyes. What she knew today was the first time in her life. Shock, fear, doubt, horror, and all kinds of emotions were mixed together. Why would a dead person bleed? The blood was warm and bright red, just like the blood of a living person. But clearly, she was clearly dead. She was clearly dead. Li Yingying crawled up from Gu Yueqin's body in a panic. She could no longer move, her body lying there softly, as though she had fallen asleep. If it wasn't for the wounds on her body, if it wasn't for her 5 intact limbs returning to her neck and head, everything would have been fine. It wouldn't have been like what she saw when she came in, her limbs dismembered. But now, she was clearly fine. Her arms and legs were all there. Her head was all right, and she looked like she was asleep. Her eyes were closed, and her eyeballs could not be seen. Her little mouth also slowly closed, and she was no longer the crippled her. She was still holding the stick in her hand, and the stick was stained with her blood. For a moment, Li Yingying stood there. There was nothing more difficult for her to digest than being intact. It was like a dream. The scene just now was her illusion. It was all her illusion. Gu Yueqin's body wasn't dismembered, and everything about her was fine. Just like how she didn't get up to attack her just now, it was all because of her. It was everything that she imagined because of fear, and she hit her without caring. Read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, The Regent, Messing with Clawbook House for free. Chapter 549. She didn't even know how Gu Yueqin appeared here, or how she appeared in front of her. She only knew that she was in a daze, as though she was in a dream. A dream within a dream. It was hard to wake up from such a realistic dream. Qin. At this moment, the tightly shut door of the imperial study was finally pushed open from the outside. She finally saw the man she had been yearning for a long time coming in from the outside. He was dressed in a dragon robe. His face was handsome and gentle, but it couldn't conceal his kingly aura. The moment she saw Feng Jiuqing, Li Yingying finally couldn't hold back her tears. She wanted to throw herself at him, wanted to throw herself into his arms, wanted to tell him how terrifying the scene she had just experienced was. She saw the late Empress come back to life, saw the late Empress want to kill her. She was so cruel. She strangled her so cruelly. Her limbs were separated from her body, and they were sewn up with needles and thread. The way she walked and the worms she spat out from her mouth. She didn't have a tongue. She was just an empty shell. It was so scary. When she hit her, she even opened up her brain and saw the brain juices inside. Li Yingying didn't dare to recall it. Her body was trembling. She covered her mouth and her body trembled. She didn't even dare to throw away the wooden stick in her hand. She was afraid that this woman would wake up again and strangle her neck. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to resist, and she was afraid that the suffocating pain would make her try again. But she had neglected the young emperor's feelings at this moment. Her gentle face turned pale when she saw the woman on the ground, especially her dark and serene eyes, which were incomparably scarlet. It was just like when she hit Gu Yueqin without caring about anything. The endless dark red blood that spread from her body was so glaring, so bright, so red. She didn't know why, but this Feng Jiuqing looked much scarier than the emperor she knew, especially the endless coldness and murderous intent that spread from his body. It made her subconsciously think that he would kill her. Li Yingying let go of the wooden stick in her hand. Her lips trembled as she watched the man approach her. However, he bent over and hugged the corpse on the ground. There was only heartache and love in his eyes. His hand lovingly caressed her scarred face. Every time he glanced at it, his hand would tremble a little. He hugged her quietly, caressing her face with his hand. His jade-white hand slid over her wound, gently wiping away the blood on her body. He was so careful, as if he was treating a rare treasure. Li Yingying had never seen the emperor so gentle, even though he had always given her the feeling of gentleness, as gentle as water, as though he would never get angry. But now, she finally understood what true gentleness was. It was undisguised. In his eyes were filled with satisfaction, and he only followed her. It wasn't the kind of gentleness that was fake and perfunctory, nor was it the kind of gentleness that was faked. This was how he should be. He was so infatuated with a woman. It was unlike him to be infatuated and affectionate. It turned out, this was the most infatuated scene of the emperor. Read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, The Regent, Messing with Clawbook House for free. Chapter 550. Li Yingying couldn't help but recall the first time she was pampered. That night, he called out Qin. Such lingering longing was heart-wrenching. Qin, your majesty. Li Yingying panicked when she saw the scene in front of her. Compared to the injuries Gu Yueqin suffered as a corpse, Li Yingying was the one who was tortured to the point that her hair was disheveled and her body was full of injuries. However, the man she was infatuated with did not even look at her. nor did he take the initiative to ask if she was injured. Instead, he held the woman who had died a long time ago tightly in his arms, with a face full of tenderness. Even if she was a rare treasure, she could not be cherished like this. Inexplicably, Li Yingying's heart started to fill with endless worry and fear. It was more terrifying and frightening than when she was alone with Gu Yueqi. Your Majesty, the late Empress, bang. She didn't even see when the young emperor had attacked her. Her entire body flew out uncontrollably and then smashed heavily into the dragon throne above. The sturdy dragon throne almost shattered her bones. At that moment, she almost suffocated from the pain and couldn't breathe. Blood spurted out from her mouth as she looked at the young emperor. His eyes were cold and indifferent, and his entire body was filled with a chill that could numb one's heart. At that moment, Li Yingying thought he was going to kill her. She struggled to get up from the ground. The blood at the corner of her mouth was bright red. She looked at Feng Juqing and said, "Your Majesty, it's the late Empress." However, the man wouldn't give her a chance to explain. "These injuries on Qiner, were they all caused by you?" The few emotionless words made Li Yingying shiver. If Gu Yueqin made her feel fear and dread, then Feng Juqing's cold words, to her, were like a talisman that hastened her death. "Your Majesty, the late Empress, it's not what you see, it's the late Empress. I'm asking you, is it true or not?" The emperor's tone was sharp and piercing. Li Yingying was so afraid that she wanted to retreat, but her body was covered in injuries, especially the palm strike that Feng Juqing suddenly gave her. Although it was hard to see with the naked eye, it was as if her internal organs had shifted from their original positions. She screamed, and another mouthful of blood spurted from her mouth. She shook her head violently. "Your Majesty, please listen to this servant's explanation. This servant didn't really want to hit the late Empress, but..." Qiuyang, a black figure, appeared in front of her. Just like Feng Juqing, he was as cold as a statue, without any emotions. "Drag him out and hack him into pieces, Emperor." Li Yingying was shocked. She didn't expect that Feng Juqing would really treat her like this. When did the handsome and gentle man in her impression become like this? Cold and emotionless, without the slightest bit of emotion. He even used such an indifferent tone to speak to her, saying such cruel words, wanting to kill her. "Your Majesty," Li Yingying cried out. She struggled to get up from the ground and wanted to scratch the corner of the emperor's clothes. "Your Majesty, please listen to this servant's explanation. It's really not what you see. It was the late Empress who attacked this servant first. She's alive, and she wants to kill this servant. This servant fought back because I struggled and resisted. If this servant didn't fight back, then this servant would be the one who died. Your Majesty, Qin wants your life, so you obediently give it to her. Who allowed you to hurt her?" Baiduan read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, The Prince Regent, Messing with Clawbook House, for free. Chapter 551. The man's gaze towards her was filled with bone-piercing killing intent. Li Yingying was shocked and didn't say anything for a long time. Seeing that Qiuyang was really going to pull her away, she resisted with all her might. "Your Majesty, this servant was framed. Your Majesty, why don't you think about why this servant suddenly appeared here? Someone must have framed this servant. Your Majesty, this servant didn't see the late Empress like this just now. Her limbs were all chopped off. Her hands, legs, and head were all sewn back together with a needle and thread. At that time, her head was almost hanging on the ground, and she didn't have a tongue. A lot of worms came out of her mouth. Your Majesty," Li Yingying cried out bitterly, "this servant dares to swear that this servant had no grudge with the late Empress. Why would she hurt her? Your Majesty, this servant really doesn't know what happened. It was this servant from the Empress's palace who said that Your Majesty's illness had flared up and asked Imperial Consort Nyang to come and visit Your Majesty. Imperial Consort Nyang's body was unwell, so she had to come later. This servant was worried that Your Majesty wouldn't be able to handle it, so I made the decision to come to the Imperial study on my own accord. Your Majesty, this servant has been wrongly accused. You must be clear about this, Your Majesty, if your Majesty doesn't believe me, you can summon Imperial Consort Nyang. Come, Imperial Consort Nyang will definitely clear this servant's name. Your Majesty, there is a reason for this. I hope your Majesty. Compared to Feng Zheching's unreasonable behavior, Xiao Yang was much calmer. Not to mention the fact that Li Yingying was a weak girl who did not know martial arts. There were so many embroidered uniform hidden guards in the Imperial study. It was impossible for them to let her in so openly. When he and the Emperor received the news from the Phoenix Perch Palace, they hurried over to the Imperial study. Not only were they unable to find any traces of the Dark Guards, it seemed like Li Yingying was the only one left in the huge Imperial study. This woman had no status or background, so it was impossible for her to be so capable. Maybe it was as she said, that she was framed. As for the person who framed her, he heard her mention the late Empress. Xiao Yang looked at the ugly expression on the Emperor's face, since this maid said that she was a palace maid in the Empress quarters and said that your Majesty has a head disease. Then this matter should have come from Xianghe Palace. Your Majesty, this Li Yingying is by Guifei's side. What? How can we not punish the maidservants by her side? Emperor. The red-eyed Emperor seemed to only have one person in his eyes. Xiao Yang knew that even if he brought up Shen Yueji now, it would be useless. Chapter 552. Who said that the Emperor was heartless? Just by looking at his treasured look, it was obvious that he loved her deeply. Although she didn't know why he wanted to kill the former Empress when he loved her so much. Stop! Li Yingying's face turned pale. The only hope in her heart was destroyed by the man's action. She closed her eyes in despair. This might be the price she had to pay for loving a man. When she did everything for him, the funny thing was that he didn't have her in his heart. Instead, he had another woman in his heart, and she just so happened to beat the woman he loved black and blue all over her body. A pleasant voice with a trace of majesty came from behind her. Hearing this familiar voice, Li Yingying opened her eyes in an instant. Then, she was happy. She looked back with joy. Sure enough, she saw Shen Yueji wearing a simple but elegant dress. She was supported by double happiness. Her face was pale, and her body was weak because she had just recovered from her injuries. The moment she saw her, she couldn't tell what she felt in her heart. She just pursed her lips, and even her begging for mercy was much weaker. When Xiao Yang saw her, he bowed respectfully. Greetings, Imperial Concubine. I don't know what Li Yingying did to make your Majesty so angry that you want to kill her. The rest of the words, as the Emperor turned around. And when she saw his scarlet eyes, Shen Yueji suddenly stopped. Even though she did not understand why Feng Zheching would change so quickly, she had also interacted with his red eyes for a period of time in the time they had spent together. Every time, he would want to kill her. Sure enough, the way the man looked at her now was cold and ruthless, as if he was looking at a stranger. And she was not even a stranger. He was like a different person from the man who treated her as gentle as water. The body of the former empress was held in the arms of the young emperor. Everyone present could see it. Xiao Yang saw her eyes fall on Feng Zheching's arms. He knew that she saw it, so he didn't hide anything. What happened is what your Majesty saw. This maidservant was reckless and dared to hit the former empress with a wooden stick. The former empress was a dead person. Now her body, after all, it was her previous life. When she saw her body being held in the arms of a man, carefully as if it was a treasure, it was as if he had experienced a dream. Even though she already knew that the woman lying in the secret chamber of the imperial study was herself, when she saw that familiar face, that familiar figure, that simple yet elegant white robes, Shen Yueji's heart was more or less moved. It was especially so for her, who was now covered in wounds. Her pale face was also covered in wounds, and her body was covered in dark red blood. It was unknown whether it was her or Li Yingying's. Without waiting for Shen Yueji to speak, Li Yingying cried bitterly and explained, "Your Highness, you have to believe this servant. This servant really didn't treat the former empress like that. It wasn't like what His Majesty saw. This servant saw that the former empress had woken up. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws at this servant. This servant was forced to retaliate. Otherwise, this servant would be the one to die. This servant begs your highness to plead with his majesty to spare this servant. This servant also doesn't know what happened. Just now, this servant clearly saw that the former empress appearance was different from how it is now. The emperor let out a furious roar. It was daunting. Read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, The Prince Regent, Messing with the Body Claw Bookhouse for free. Chapter 553. Li Yingying's crying stopped abruptly. She just looked at the young and handsome emperor as if he was a stranger at this moment. This lowly servant is a slave of your Fengqi palace. Imperial concubine didn't discipline her properly, so she caused trouble. Now, Imperial concubine still wants to plead for her? The man's emotionless words made Shen Yueji have no doubt that he meant that if she dared to plead for her, he would definitely deal with her as well. The development of the matter was beyond Shen Yueji's expectation. Even if she had taken all precautions to come here, she had neglected that the red-eyed Feng Juqing and the black-eyed emperor were two different people. In front of the red-eyed Feng Juqing, no matter what she said or did, he would not listen. Your Majesty. Shen Yueji knelt on the ground and looked neither servile nor overbearing. Your Majesty, please investigate this matter clearly. It's because I know that Li Yingying is a slave of my Fengqi palace. I have known Li Yingying for some time, and I know her a little bit. I am willing to believe everything she said is true. Recently, the rumors about the late empress have been spreading in the harem for some time. She raised her eyes and saw Feng Juqing's gloomy face, which was like an iceberg that was about to burst. She gritted her teeth and braced herself. I know that your Majesty loves the late empress, and you hate Li Yingying for not knowing what to do and hurting the late empress's body, but, she raised her head. Your Majesty also punished Li Yingying, didn't you? The injury on her arm is enough to relieve your Majesty's hatred. At this moment, your Majesty should calm down and analyze who is behind all this. Before this, there was a slave who claimed to be from Shanghe Palace who was ordered by the Empress to say that your Majesty had a headache in the imperial study and asked me to come and accompany your Majesty. To relieve the headache. I was not feeling well, so I stayed in Fengqi Palace for some time and asked Li Yingying to come and visit me first. Although I don't know what happened after she came to the imperial study, I can guarantee that there must be someone behind all this. Moreover, that person must have come for this concubine. This concubine was unwell and couldn't come earlier, so Li Yingying rushed ahead of this concubine and caught up with this matter. At the side, Li Yingying complained in a low voice. What Imperial Consort Nyang said is absolutely true. It was this servant who made the decision to come to the imperial study to visit His Majesty behind Imperial Consort Nyang's back. Everything is this servant's fault. If she had known that this would happen when she came to the imperial study, she would never have thought of doing that. Only now did she understand what Shen Yueji had said to her before entering the palace. In this harem, there were dangerous places everywhere. If she was not careful in the past, she didn't think much of it. She thought that as long as she was kind to others, she would be worry-free in the harem. Even if she didn't have a huge family, what could she do? But now, such thoughts had long since been erased from the bottom of her heart. According to Imperial Consort Nyang, this matter is related to the Empress? This concubine is also afraid that there is a trap. Although that slave who claimed to be from Shanghe Palace claimed to be a slave of Shanghe Palace, this concubine has never seen her before. I only felt that this person was unfamiliar, so before she left, I ordered someone to secretly detain her. As for today's matter in the imperial study, His Majesty only needs to ask that slave to know. Imperial Consort Shun is really scheming. This sentence was neither light nor heavy. It seemed to be a compliment, but also a criticism. Read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, The Prince Regent, Messing with Claw Bookhouse for free. Chapter 554. She looked at the emperor who still had red eyes. She was surprised. His red eyes only appeared for a moment, and he could suppress them and restore them to black. But now, after such a long time, it seemed that he didn't want to retreat at all. She could deal with the gentle and affectionate Feng Juqing for the time being, But Shin Yueji didn't know anything about the red-eyed Feng Juqing. Qiuyang, Your Majesty, call the Empress here. I want to ask her personally. Yes. Qiuyang hesitated, looked at Shun Yueji who was kneeling there, and left. From the beginning to the end, Shun Yueji knelt there, and the young emperor didn't move, as if she didn't exist. She hadn't knelt for so long since she was reborn, and she wasn't unscathed from the broken heart cliff. Her legs were a little numb, but when she raised her head to look at the handsome emperor, he held her body in his arms as if it was a precious treasure. He was so careful and cautious, as if he was afraid that he would hurt her if he made any heavy movements. Your Majesty, there's something I don't understand. She suddenly spoke, which made Feng Juqing's hand on Gu Yueqin's face stop. Then he looked at her with his dark eyes and responded silently. Shun Yueji moved her lips. I heard that the late empress was already drowned in the lake, and her face was covered with nails, and even the child in her belly was. In an instant, cold air spread everywhere. If it wasn't for someone secretly protecting her, Shin Yueji couldn't guarantee that she wouldn't be like Li Yingying, flying out powerlessly. She knelt in the same place, which surprised Feng Juqing a little. His words were still full of sarcasm. You're indeed a woman from a family of generals. What a strong will. But what qualifications do you have to ask about my affairs? Your Majesty hid the late Empress's body in the imperial study, and today so many people saw it. So what? Even if your Shin family has a high position in the court, do you need me to remind you what you should say and what you shouldn't say? I won't say it, but it doesn't mean that there are no impenetrable walls in this world. Feeling his sharp killing intent fall on Li Yingying's body, Li Yingying was the first to react. Her lips trembled as she tried to argue for herself. Emperor, don't worry. This servant will not speak carelessly. This servant will forever keep what I saw in my heart and will never mention it. Imperial Guard Xiao is His Majesty's trusted secret guard, so he must have known about this long ago. Naturally, I won't betray Your Majesty, but has Your Majesty ever thought that the Empress might know of this? Her words made the Emperor's eyes narrow. Just now, this concubine also told Your Majesty that it was a servant from the Empress Xiang, He Palace, who said that Your Majesty's body was unwell. In the end, Yingying came earlier than this concubine, and such a thing happened. This matter was originally targeted at this concubine, but Yingying was used as a shield. So, this concubine guessed that the Empress already knew about this matter? You want to kill two birds with one stone? You want to take the opportunity to get rid of the late Empress's body and make Your Majesty hate me because of the late Empress? Thinking about it carefully, what Shin Yueji said was not unreasonable. Feng Juqing already hated that self-righteous woman. Now hearing Shun Yueji's words, if it's really her, I won't let her off easily. Chapter 555. Your Majesty has promised me that the Gu family has a high status in the court and cannot be touched easily. Even if this matter is related to the Empress, I'm afraid that Your Majesty will not be able to punish her. It's just the Gu family. I am the ruler of Feng country. Do you think I will be afraid of a mere official? The man sneered and held the woman's body in his arms. If it is really as Imperial concubine Shan said, and this matter is related to the Empress, I will not let it go. As for you, the servant of Feng Qi Palace. He looked at Li Yingying coldly. Li Yingying felt numb under his cold gaze. An intense chill swept through her body, and she knelt there, shivering. No matter what the reason is, Qin, or who hurt me is true. Imperial concubine Shan, how do you think I should be satisfied with her? Since Li Yingying hit the Empress with her hands, then cut off her hands as an apology to the Empress. Imperial concubine. Li Yingying couldn't believe what she heard. Who knew better than her what cutting off her hands meant to her? She would be a cripple. How could a healthy person like her become a cripple? If she lost both her arms, then how? How could she be favored again? At this moment, she was filled with hatred towards Shan Yueji. That hatred rose up spontaneously, especially when she saw that Shin Yueji didn't even look at her and decided to punish her. What did a pair of hands mean to her? If she lost her hands, she would be a cripple. Who would allow herself to be a cripple? Imperial concubine Shan, Do you really want to cut off my hands? It's not that I want to cut off your hands, but I want to give the Empress an explanation. Remember, His Majesty wants your life, but this consort only wants to save your life. Compared to keeping you alive, these hands of yours are indeed nothing. But this servant still needs to serve Imperial concubine Shan. If this servant's hands are cut off, this servant won't be able to serve Imperial concubine Shan. My Phoenix Perch Palace doesn't lack servants. Imperial concubine Shan. Shun Yueji's tone was cold. One of her arms had been destroyed and was dripping with blood. Even if it was cured, it would be useless. Why are you doing this to me? She clearly knew that the Empress had a trick. Why didn't she tell her in advance? That way, she wouldn't have come and wouldn't have ended up in this situation. She was good at scheming. No matter what Gu Yueqin did, it was all within her calculations. Why didn't she tell her even though she knew? Li Yingying's eyes were also brimming with tears. Shuangshi stood respectfully at the side, unable to ignore the intense hatred that shot out from the depths of her eyes. Indeed, compared to her life, these hands were much lighter. Moreover, the Emperor seemed to be very satisfied with her ladyship's explanation. He only lacked the punishment. Seeing the hidden guards coming forward to carry out the punishment, Your Majesty, Shin Yueji suddenly said. The Emperor looked at her impatiently. Does the Imperial consort still want to plead for leniency? Everything is still unknown. The Empress hasn't arrived yet, so this matter needs to be discussed at length. Why don't we wait for the truth? I've said it before, it's a fact that this bitch hurt Qin. Li Yingying looks 90% similar to the late Empress. Doesn't Your Majesty feel that hurting her is like hurting the late Empress? That one sentence made the man stunned. Baiduan read the latest chapter of Exploding Cute Pet Concubine, The Regent, Messing with the Clawbook House, for free. Chapter 556. He lowered his head and looked at the young girl in his arms. Wu Su raised his head and looked at Li Yingying, who was kneeling not far away. Indeed, the two of them looked very similar. If one had not known them for a long time, it would have been difficult to tell them apart. However, the man quickly retracted his gaze from Li Yingying and said, Speaking of this matter, I have yet to pursue Imperial Consort Shun's wrongdoings. Why did you find a woman who looks similar to Qin to confuse me? It's all because Your Majesty is obsessed with the late Empress and has no interest in politics. I couldn't bear to see Your Majesty grieving over this, so I came up with this idea. Your Majesty, you have tacitly agreed to all of this. Have you forgotten about it so quickly? The man's dark eyes were sharp. Sensing her probing, he carefully placed the woman in his arms on the table and walked towards her. Shun Yueji was a little flustered when she saw the man walking towards her. It was the same in the past. She had no intention of disobeying him, but he had tried to kill her several times. Furthermore, the strong murderous intent in his eyes did not seem to be fake. He had tried to kill her several times. She was starting to suspect that there were two people living in Feng Jiuqing's body. Even her reincarnation had occurred because of such an unimaginable conjecture, let alone him. What are you testing me about? This concubine doesn't dare. This concubine is only speaking the truth. After all, these things were promised to this concubine by Your Majesty, and it was also tacitly acknowledged by this concubine. This concubine just doesn't understand why Your Majesty seems to have forgotten everything today. Perhaps it was because there were other people around. The man did not make a move on her this time. Instead, his thin lips curled into a cruel smile. By the time Shin Yueji reacted, all she could hear was Li Yingying's heart-wrenching screams. The air was filled with the strong smell of blood. The smell of blood was nauseating. Then, she saw that Li Yingying, who had been perfectly fine a moment ago, had lost her arms. She was lying helplessly on the ground, rolling around in pain. Her beautiful face was contorted by this heart-wrenching pain. There was already a sea of blood beneath her. It was a ghastly sight. Shin Yueji did not expect Feng Jiuqing to make a move just like that. She was caught off guard, and when she saw Li Yingying in such a terrible state, she only gave Shuangshi a look. Seeing this, Shuangshi immediately went forward and patted Li Yingying's shoulder. The girl looked extremely helpless as she fainted. Even the white clothes on his body were dyed red with blood, making him look like a red wedding dress. She did not see when Feng Juqing made his move, but other than the black-clothed man who had not moved at all, they were the only ones left. Shen Yueji pretended to be calm. Your Majesty can be so heartless to the woman you sleep with. Is it that when you treat her well, if this concubine makes a mistake, you will also treat this concubine like this? The cruel smile on the man's lips could not be hidden. What does Imperial Consort think? If I had come here today to treat the former Empress as this servant's concubine, Your Majesty would not have punished this servant's concubine like this, right? Imperial Consort Shun, since you are the mistress of the inner palace, you should understand what you should do and what you shouldn't do. You should not challenge Zhen's bottom line. Qin none of you are qualified to touch her, including him. This him that His Majesty is talking about, I wonder who he is referring to? The Empress has arrived. Chapter 557. The report made Shen Yueji swallow the words that were at the tip of her tongue. She just realized that Gao Dazhong wasn't with Feng Juqing, but with Gu Yuan. Greetings to Your Majesty. I didn't know that Your Majesty would summon me at this time. Before she could finish her words, she raised her head and was shocked to see Gu Yuqing in his arms. Gu Yuan covered her mouth in fear, so that she didn't scream, Sister, sister, didn't my sister already? At this time, Gu Yuan suddenly thought of something and turned her head quickly. When she saw Li Yingying lying in a pool of blood, her face changed dramatically. Not Li Yingying? Not someone who looked like her sister. Looking at the indifferent face of the young emperor, Gu Yuan felt uneasy. Your Majesty, why is my sister's body here? She isn't. Isn't she already dead? The young emperor's tone was as cold as ice. Gu Yuan raised her head suddenly and saw the emperor's scarlet eyes that could drip blood. There was a flash of fear in her eyes, which was almost the same as Shen Yueji's. Her reaction made Shen Yueji suspicious. Could it be that she also knew that Feng Juqing had two personalities? And looking at her reaction, it seemed that she was very afraid of the current Feng Juqing. Gu Yuan's face was pale, but she pretended to be calm. I'm stupid. I don't understand what Your Majesty is talking about. Today, I was plotted against and poisoned. Originally, I planned to rest early today, but I didn't expect that Xiao Yang would go to my place and say that the Emperor wants to see me. So, I came here. I don't know what happened, and she raised her head and looked at Gu Yuqing's body, which was still intact. Why is my sister's body in the imperial study? Ah, a scream. Her whole body was in the young emperor's palm. The man's strong strength and bloodthirsty scarlet eyes made Gu Yuan struggle and resist. Her feet were off the ground, and only her hands were clapping nonstop with the emperor's strong hands. Cough, cough. Cough, cough. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, this concubine is Yin. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, you can't. Xiao Yang didn't dare to hesitate when he saw Gu Yuan being unceremoniously captured by the man. He quickly pulled out his long sword and stabbed it towards the man. As Feng Juqing's trusted aide, Xiao Yang's loyalty wasn't inferior to anyone else. But now, he actually dared to openly attack Feng Juqing. The man didn't put him in his eyes at all. Even if Xiao Yang attacked him, he just waved his hand coldly and Xiao Yang flew out uncontrollably. Your Majesty, you mustn't. The person in your hands is the Empress, the youngest daughter of the Gu family. Xiao Yang spat out a mouthful of blood with great difficulty. His words sounded even weaker. Feng Juqing sneered, and the corners of his lips curled up disdainfully. The one I want to kill is her. Cough, cough, cough. Gu Yuan struggled with all her might in his hands. But how could a woman be a match for a man? Not to mention that Feng Juqing had clearly known who she was from the start and wanted to kill her. Swoosh. Just when Gu Yuan was completely immersed in the suffocating pain, a cold light flashed in front of her eyes, and there was the sound of a long sword being unsheathed. Yuan took the suffocating girl into his arms and retreated 3 feet away. Chapter 558. Gu Yuan gasped for air. She didn't even care about her image at this moment. She hid in Yu Yin's embrace, not daring to come out. She looked at the man who wanted to put her to death in fear. Your Highness, what's wrong with His Majesty? Has he gone mad? Beside her, Shuangshi carefully walked to Shen Yueji's side and helped her up from the ground. Shen Yueji didn't have the heart to answer her. Instead, she looked at the man who was holding Gu Yuan in his arms with a pained expression. The young man who was once covered in blood had grown up into an elegant young man. Thinking back to the time when he appeared at the entrance of the Prime Minister's residence covered in blood, she secretly carried him on her back and took care of him for 3 days and 3 nights. A person who was about to die was forcefully pulled back by her with all her might. Later on, this matter was discovered by Gu Yuan. Seeing this young master's delicate appearance, she kept him by her side. From then on, Shen Yueji only knew that Gu Yuan had gained a trusted secret guard. This secret guard obeyed her orders. No matter what she wanted, he would think of a way. Even if it was a mountain of knives or a sea of flames, he would snatch it back for her. What are you still standing there for? Hurry and summon the imperial physician. Gu Yuan screamed at the top of her lungs. She pushed Yuan away and slapped him on the face. The handsome young man's handsome face had a conspicuous palm print, but he stood there without moving. If I leave, he will hurt you. Don't worry about it. I'm his empress. I'm the woman he loves the most. He's just been bewitched by that slut. He will get better. Yuan was pushed away by her, but he didn't say a word. He didn't even move a single step. At this time, countless secret guards appeared from the shadows. It was chaotic, and it was hard to tell who was whose. At this time, Shen Yueji saw a figure flash past in front of her, then behind her. The body of the emperor, who had scarlet eyes and a domineering aura, slowly fell down. Kong Yin supported him, shook his head and sighed, saying Ba. When this farce began and when it ended, it was like a dream. Feng Juqing woke up very quickly. Gu Yuan was the first to rush over and hug the man's arm, sobbing uncontrollably, Your Majesty, do you know that your headache is acting up again? You almost killed this concubine just now. Gu Yuan showed him the red mark on her neck. The man faintly glanced at her. There was no expression on his handsome face, but he still gently comforted her a few times and said some words of apology. Soon, Shen Yueji felt the emperor's gaze on her. Just now, Yuing had already disappeared somewhere. She saw Feng Juqing coming down from his high seat and walking towards her step by step. Shen Yueji stood there without moving. The man gently took her into his arms. Yuji, I lost control again. Did I hurt you? No. Shen Yueji shook her head and looked at the lifeless Li Yingying. Your Majesty, although you didn't hurt this concubine, you hurt Miss Yingying. Your Majesty, speaking of which, Miss Yingying was innocent because she was worried about you, and now her legs have been chopped off. Gao Dazhong. Your Majesty, your servant is here. Pass down my decree. From today onwards, Li Yingying will be reinstated as a second-rank concubine. Yes, Your Majesty. Then, at this point, Gao Dazhong paused and signaled the emperor to look back. Chapter 559. The body of the late empress was still there. The fact that Gu Yueqin's body had been buried was no longer a secret. Everyone present knew about it. Feng Juqing glanced at the woman's corpse, and his brows knit together while a wisp of disgust flashed through his eyes. In next to no time, he moved his gaze away and pulled Shen Yueji into his embrace. Qiuyang, your subordinate is here. Put her back where she was. Yes, just as Feng Juqing had said, that man was getting more and more uncontrollable. If he were to deal with Gu Yueqin now, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't jump out again. At that time, even if Kong Yin was here, it would be useless. Your Majesty. She had suffered such a big shock. She thought that the emperor would comfort her at least a little. She didn't expect that he would just say a sentence that was as emotionless as a machine, and then he went to Shen Yueji's side. Gu Yuan clenched her fists. Your Majesty, this concubine doesn't feel well. Gao Dazhong, your servant is here. Send the empress back to her palace. Summon the Tai to take a look at her body. Yes, Emperor. Gu Yuan looked up at him in disbelief. How did Yu Ji appear here? How did Gu Yuan's body become public? Empress, Do you still want us to continue? Gu Yuan understood what Feng Juqing was trying to say. If she continued to pester him, he would make her pay for what she had done to Gu Yueqin, including how she had schemed against Shin Yueji. However, she was unwilling to leave just like that. She wanted Shin Yueji to stay and give them a chance to be alone. Your Majesty, this concubine is also tired. Since Your Majesty is fine, this concubine will return to Phoenix Palace to rest first. Yuji, wait a moment. We have something to say to you. Seeing that she was about to leave, the man grabbed her hand and didn't let her go. Qiuyang, wait outside and don't let anyone in. Kongyin, you stay here.
Yes.
Yes, Your Majesty. Both Double Happiness and Gu Yuan were chased out. Soon, only the three of them were left in the large imperial study. Feng Juqing did not say anything, and neither did Shin Yueji. She just lowered her head, deep in thought. The man lifted Wu Su's chin. She was forced to look at the man's gentle and handsome face. Don't you want to ask me? When we were in the general's estate, His Majesty had also done this. This concubine knows that His Majesty was unwilling to talk about this matter with others. This Chia knows that Your Majesty likes clever and obedient women, so even if this Chia has doubts in my heart, I still don't dare to overstep my boundaries. Yuji, we hope that you can ask us. This Chia doesn't know how to ask Your Majesty. Just like what the Empress said just now, this Chia feels that Your Majesty cares about this Chia, but sometimes, this Chia feels that Your Majesty treats this Chia as a dispensable person. At this point, Shin Yueji looked at Kong Yin and said, I had originally planned to ask Grandmaster Kong Yin, Ba. As matters stand, this is all this I can do. Perhaps Imperial Consort doesn't know, but there are 2 souls living in the Emperor's body. 2 souls? How unimaginable was this? Even though he already had an answer in his heart, hearing it from Kong Yin's mouth now, seeing the look on the woman's face, the man held her pale face and chuckled. Are you afraid? Why 2 souls? I've had 2 souls since I was young. Since? Chapter 560. When my mother was still alive, she told me that she was a twin, but it was difficult to give birth, so she could only save one. Your Majesty's mother, in order to save you, there are many unimaginable things in this world. Newborn babies are filled with hatred. Even after they die, their souls are unwilling to leave. So they are placed in Your Majesty's body and were born together with Your Majesty. In the beginning, I was still able to suppress him. After all, it was his own body. But he looked at the woman lying on the dragon table. But ever since she appeared, I found out that he would secretly come out from my body to be with her. Hearing Feng Juqing's words, Shin Yueji pursed her lips and took a step back subconsciously. Yueji. Seeing this, Feng Juqing hurriedly grabbed her hand. I know you can't accept it right now. She couldn't accept that he was one person, but there were 2 souls living in his body. One of them loved Gu Yueqin, and the other loved her. Shin Yueji felt complicated. Actually, Your Majesty loved the late Empress, but the one who loved the late Empress was not you, but someone else?
Yes.
Feng Juqing nodded without hesitation. Then, the one who executed the late Empress was you, Your Majesty, and not him? Executing Gu Yueqin was originally to appease the Gu family, allowing Gu Yuan to smoothly ascend to the position of Empress. But for some reason, when he met Shin Yueji's gaze, he couldn't bring himself to say the word, yes, no matter what. He didn't know why he wanted to tell Shin Yueji all this. Since she had already seen what happened tonight, and since he had already thought about looking down on the Feng nation with her, he decided to try to believe her and accept everything she told him. But he was afraid that if he said it, Shin Yueji would treat him as a weirdo. Yueji, I know it's hard for you to accept it. I'm also trying to think of a way. Because I executed the woman he loved, he knows that I care about you. So he always wants to hurt you. Those vows of undying love, those words he said he liked her, and on the heartbroken cliff, he tried his best to protect her scarlet eyes. She thought that it was because Feng Juqing cared too much about her and was too afraid of losing her that his eyes turned red. Now that she thought about it, it turned out that everything was just a dream. Even if there were 2 souls in the same body, the man had never let her down. The person who wanted to kill her was this man. But now, he was thinking of ways to get rid of that man. It was as if fate was making a fool out of them. Your Majesty, have you thought of a way? Very soon, Yuji, give us time. We will definitely not let him harm you. Feng Juqing did not tell her the exact time. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her shoulders and said, "Trust me. Where's the late Empress?" She pushed the man away slightly and looked at the girl lying on the dragon table. It was a familiar face and a familiar figure. Looking at it now, it felt as if it was a lifetime ago. I heard that the child in the late Empress belly was taken out by Your Majesty personally. Her face was full of nails, and she was sunk in the South Lake. With so many people seeing it, how could she appear here unscathed? How could her face be unscathed? Even her belly, it was so flat, as if nothing had happened and she had not gone through those hardships. Chapter 561. Gu Yueqin is not pregnant. It's just an illusion. She has never slept with me, including him. Never? She looked into the man's serious eyes. Illusion? All of this is an illusion Your Majesty gave her? Then, when she was executed by Your Majesty, was it also an illusion? She couldn't say it was an illusion. He really wanted to execute Gu Yueqin. It was that man who suddenly appeared and secretly manipulated everything. But Gu Yueqin was indeed dead. He watched her die with his own eyes. Then, for a moment, it was hard to digest what Feng Juqing said to her. Xin Yueji looked at Kong Yin and saw him nodding at her. She knew that Feng Juqing didn't lie to her. It was no wonder that she would faint at every critical moment. In fact, even the child was an illusion. They had never slept together, so how could they have a child? Until now, she was still a virgin? As if she thought of something, she quickly pushed the man away, ran to the dragon table, and lifted the woman's arm. At this moment, the chastity mark fell into her eyes like mockery. Previously, she thought that she had slept with a man, and even the chastity mark on her arm disappeared. But now, the chastity mark appeared in front of her. It was so glaring. This meant, in her previous life, she and Feng Juqing really didn't have a child? She was innocent until the day she died? With complicated feelings in her heart, Xin Yueji slowly put down her hand and took a few steps back. She saw Feng Juqing walking towards her quickly. "Yueji, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" "Your Majesty, I'm tired. I want to go back and rest." The man made a gesture to carry her up. "I'll go to your place tonight." "Your Majesty." She struggled in his arms, looked up, and met the man's displeased eyes. "There are so many things happening in the Imperial study tonight. Your Majesty still has a lot of things to deal with, so you don't have to go to my place." I need to digest." Feng Juqing didn't force her. He nodded. "All right, I'll order someone to send you back." "There's no need. Shuangxi is outside. I'll be fine with Shuangxi accompanying me." Having said that, she did not look at the Emperor's reaction and turned to leave. The man watched her leave in a daze. It wasn't until Kong Yin called him from behind that he came back to his senses and looked at her. "Your Majesty, should we return the Empress body to its original place?" If he could, he wanted to burn the corpse. Feng Juqing knew that he couldn't do this. The person in his body was getting more and more uncontrollable. If he were to find out that he had burned the woman he loved to death, Feng Juqing didn't know what he would do. Suddenly, he slammed his fist heavily on the dragon table. Kong Yin's expression did not change. He looked at him coldly as his gaze fell on Gu Yueqin's body. "What's so good about you? You made that person abandon his life and his country just to protect you?" He couldn't understand. The relationship between a man and a woman was the most unworthy thing in this world. It was the same for him towards Shun Yueji. Although he liked her, it wasn't to the point where he could give up everything for her. But today, he had almost killed Gu Yuan for her sake. If it wasn't for Kong Yin, how could he explain it to the Gu family? For this woman, he was always so ruthless and destroyed all his escape routes. He abandoned his country. The soul of the man who loved her? In her heart, she wanted him to stay. Kong Yin looked at her expression and guessed what she was thinking. He smiled faintly. May I ask, Nyang Nyang, who is more important in your heart right now, the regent or the emperor? Almost without thinking, Shun Yueji immediately said, Of course it's Imo Wushang. That's right. Your Highness is not reconciled to the previous emperor. Chapter 563. Now that your Highness knows what happened back then, you know that His Majesty isn't alone, but has two souls in his body. You know that his feelings for you aren't fake, but that fate is playing tricks on people. I believe your Highness has also let go of some things. Yes, Kong Yin was right. Even if she knew some secrets about Feng Juqing, it would never be possible for them to be together again. She knew clearly who she liked now, and who she would be with in the future. Isn't it good for him to be alive? Your Highness, haven't you already seen it? What this soul cares about is not the kingdom, but yourself. If you let him live, the Feng country will definitely fall into chaos. He will become a demon because of your Highness, and he will become a tyrant because of your Highness. Therefore, he can't stay. The only one who can stay is the Emperor. You've already found a way to deal with him, haven't you? What I can do is to get rid of him without harming the Emperor. As for the method, it's only half done. I'm afraid I won't be able to do anything to him in the near future. I'll need your Highness's help in this matter. How can I help you? I believe your Highness has seen it. When the Emperor appeared, he was only for you. If anything happens to you, even the Emperor himself won't be able to suppress the soul in his body from appearing. As long as your Highness is safe, the Emperor will not have to worry. In other words, your Highness is the only one who can calm His Majesty's emotions. You want me to admit that I'm Gu Yueqin when he appears? As smart as she was, how could she not understand the meaning behind Kong Yin's words? Kong Yin nodded. Indeed, your Highness is a smart person. How would you not know how heartless the Emperor is when he appears? There were several times when he wanted to take your Highness's life. Your Highness, you've personally experienced all of this. Your Highness, I want you to admit your identity not for anything else but to protect yourself. If the Emperor appears again, he will still remember what happened today and might hurt you. Ba, her ladyship's death has always been a knot in His Majesty's heart. It's getting harder and harder for him to calm down. Every time he comes out, he will think of a way to hurt himself. Grandmaster Kong Yin, I've always thought that he was the one who used me, betrayed my feelings, and caused the death of the child in my womb. I've always hated him, and I've always wanted revenge. But now, he's telling me that he has no children, that he has never shared a room with this consort, and that the person who killed this consort wasn't him. His promise to this consort has always been true and has never been false. She hated the wrong person and took revenge on the wrong person. Really? Shin Yueji's heart was in a mess. Everything can't be generalized. This old monk's words to your Highness will always count. No matter what your Highness chooses in the end, this old monk will always stand by your Highness' side. The Emperor was a good emperor, but not a good husband. The Empress will leave sooner or later. Before she leaves, the Empress only needs to follow her heart. Kong Yin looked at her disappointed expression. Your Highness, the wind is cold and dew is heavy at night. You're still injured. You should go back and rest first. You said that his lifespan is only 3 years, right? Yes. His Majesty is busy with the affairs of the country and has been weak and sickly since young. In addition, he has twin souls in his body. His fate is destined to be full of setbacks and his lifespan will be halved. Chapter 564. I understand. It's getting late. Master Kong Yin should go back and rest. After taking one last look in the direction of the imperial study, Shin Yueji did not linger any longer and turned to leave. Kong Yin watched her leave for a while and shook his head. The grudges of this young man's life were really hard to understand. Fengqi Palishuang, she had been waiting for her for a long time because she was worried about her. When she saw her coming back, she quickly went up to her. Your Highness, why did you chase me back? I was worried for a long time. If you didn't come back, I would have gone to the imperial study to look for you. Worried about me? Shen Yueji looked up at her. Your Highness, tell me what I'm worried about. She stomped her feet. Look at His Majesty. He's too scary. He left you alone in the Imperial study. Of course I'm scared. After you came out of the Imperial study, he chased me out again. I'm really worried that you're alone in there. If His Majesty goes crazy and hurts you, I won't be able to answer to the General and Madam. Your Highness, do you think we should tell the General and Madam about His Majesty so that they can make plans? Hearing this, Shen Yueji was shocked. She raised her head almost immediately and looked at her. You can't. Your Highness? She was confused. Shen Yueji calmed down quickly. His Majesty has his reasons for hiding this. I found something. Besides, Master Kong Yin is in the palace. Nothing will happen. It's not like you don't know father and mother's temperament. If they find out about His Majesty's matter, I'm afraid that the entire capital city will know about it. After all, His Majesty is the ruler of a country. How could he end up like this? Oh, this servant understands Your Majesty's concerns. But His Majesty seemed too terrifying just now. He didn't even care about Your Majesty at all. This servant is just worried about Your Majesty. If His Majesty were to act like this again and do something to harm Your Majesty, it just so happens that this servant and Grandmaster Kong Yin aren't here, so we can't guarantee Your Majesty's safety. It's okay. It won't happen again. By the way, is Li Yingying awake? Yes. She's lying in bed. She has a bad temper. Your Highness, it's best if you don't look. This servant reckons that she's about to hate you to death right now. Oh, no matter what, she's still a member of our Phoenix Perch Palace. This time, it was indeed our fault for not being able to protect her. Speaking of this matter, she had miscalculated. She had predicted that Gu Yuan wanted to frame her, so she had pushed Li Yingying out. When the time came, she would appear again and plead with Feng Juqing. She believed that he would not do anything to Li Yingying. But what she didn't expect was for him to appear. Even Gu Yuan probably didn't expect this to happen. Her Highness, She was still a little hesitant. It was obvious that he did not want her to go over. Shen Yueji glanced at her. All right, she's like a cripple now. How do you think she can hurt me? Perhaps feeling that what she said made sense, She no longer blocked her way. All right then, Your Highness, follow this servant. Li Yingying had already woken up. Although the title of Second Imperial Concubine had returned to her, the current her was worse than a cripple with her empty arms. Her face was pale, and her almond-shaped eyes were red and swollen. Hearing the movement, she looked up suddenly. Chapter 565. When she saw Shen Yueji, a strong hatred flashed across her eyes. Shen Yueji acted as if she did not see this hatred. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed like an old friend. Her eyes fell on her empty arms. Did you just change the medicine? Does it hurt? Does it hurt? Your Highness, do you want to try? Li Yingying, how dare you? How can you speak to Imperial Consort Nyang like this? Previously, Li Yingying might have been afraid of Shuangshi's reprimand because she was Shen Yueji's confidant. She would always try to please her no matter what she did. However, it was different now. Her arms had been destroyed, and there was no longer any place for her to climb. Even if she was a second-ranked concubine, what could she do? If Imperial Consort Nyang feels that this servant is an eyesore, when this servant can move, this servant will leave on my own. In the future, I will not appear in front of Your Highness and be an eyesore. Yingying, you saw the situation at that time. The Emperor is no longer the previous Emperor. In his eyes and heart, there is only the late Empress. Even if this concubine wants to help you, I am unable to. Your Highness, have you forgotten? Before entering the palace, how did Your Highness win against this servant? You said that as long as you are in the inner palace, you can guarantee that this servant will not have to worry and will help this servant take revenge. This servant believed it. In the days when Your Highness fell off the cliff, Qiao Yu advised this servant to listen to the Empress and let this servant rely on another master to survive in the inner palace. However, this servant still remembers the kindness that Imperial Consort Nyang has shown to this servant. Ying Fei, you don't need to call yourself this servant in front of this concubine anymore. But Imperial Consort Nyang, Dare I ask you, in your heart, don't you always treat me as a servant? What difference does it make if I am a fey or a lowly servant? Your Highness will never know how loyal I am to you. For your Highness, I can refuse Xiao Yu's request to rely on the Empress when your life and death are unknown. If you are really ill, then Xiao Yu and I will be fish on the Emperor's plate. If she wants to get rid of us, it will only take a word. However, I will always remember Imperial Consort Nyang's kindness. Because I'm willing to believe in your Highness, but your Highness, may I ask, what did you give this servant? You asked the Emperor to chop off my arms. Do you know what it means to have my arms destroyed? I am a person, a living person. I need my hands. I can do many things with these hands, but because of the words of the Imperial Consort, the Emperor ordered for them to be chopped off. Dare I ask your Highness, if your hands were chopped off, would you still be able to sit here and talk to me in one piece? Do you hate me to death in your heart? You hate this consort? Yes, I hate it. You made me lose everything that I deserve. Li Ying, how dare you? You wanted to be the Emperor's woman, and now your wish has been fulfilled. Don't forget who gave you the position of second-rank consorting. That was only Imperial Consort Nyang's charity towards me. Now that I'm like a cripple, does Imperial Consort Nyang think that the Emperor will still favor a cripple like me? There are countless beauties in the Imperial harem. I admit that my looks are average and not as stunning as Imperial Consort Nyang's. Now that I've lost my arms, even if I'm a second-rank consorting, why would the Emperor still favor me? When she saw that Shen Yueji didn't say anything, she couldn't help but sneer. Imperial Consort Nyang, do you have anything to say now? Chapter 566. Double Happiness. Your Highness, you can leave first. Your Highness? Don't worry. Just as Concubining said, she is like a cripple now. How can she hurt me? Yes, Your Highness. Double Happiness was a little worried, but she didn't disobey Shen Yueji. She left respectfully. Your Highness, this servant will stand guard outside. If you need anything, shout for this servant. This servant can hear you. What right do you have to hate me now? This sentence made Li Ying raise her head and look at her with hatred. Shen Yueji smiled slightly and sat on the edge of the bed. She was very close to her and didn't move. She tilted her body slightly and looked down at her. Ingfei, don't you think that everything that you have experienced today is your own fault? Don't you think that you are infallible? When Xiao Yu died, you pushed all the blame to her. It seems that you have a deep relationship between master and servant. Even when the Empress had an accident at my place, she used Xiao Yu to threaten you. Actually, in Concubine Ying's heart, it wasn't just because of Xiao Yu. In other words, are you planning for your future? What growing up together? What deep relationship between master and servant? What glory and wealth she can share with you? You both obviously have your own thoughts. Just like her, once she climbs to a high place, she is afraid to fall down. Just like you, but you hide it too well. You have a master and a servant. You are indeed the master. In terms of scheming, you are much better than Xiao Yu. I'm afraid that even when she dies, she still thinks that you still have her in your heart and still feel guilty towards her. In fact, you already knew about everything that Xiao Yu had done behind your back, but you silently allowed her to do it. What you wanted to do but didn't dare to do, you needed someone to help you carry it out. Coincidentally, Xiao Yu's reckless behavior made you think of her. I don't understand what you are saying. What are you talking about? If Li Ying had hands, she would definitely cover her ears without hesitation. However, Shen Yueji's words made her unable to refute. She didn't want to listen anymore. She shook her head fiercely. What are you talking about? I don't understand. I don't understand anything. It doesn't matter. I'll pretend you don't understand and continue to talk about her. Since consorting doesn't like to hear this, I'll tell you something else. Gu Yuan has sent someone to Phoenix Perch Palace to pass on a message. It's clear that she's targeting me. You're just a servant in Phoenix Perch Palace. Even if you've been the Emperor's woman before, you're still insignificant and not worth mentioning in the Empress' eyes. If she wants to get rid of you, she only needs to say a single word. Perhaps she doesn't even need to say a single word. Even a glance or a single action can easily take your life. Why would she go to such great lengths to send a palace maid we've never seen to deliver a message? Anyone would know that her objective is this consort. But you were too eager to be with His Majesty and completely forgot what this consort had told you before. Not only did you not follow this consort's instructions, you even went to the imperial study on your own accord. What I saw was all real. I really saw the late Empress body. She came back to life and strangled me. If you don't believe me, look. Li Yingying raised her head and showed her the strangulation marks on her neck. The one thing he doesn't lack the least is women, especially a foolish woman like you who thinks she's infallible, thinks she's smart, and really thinks that she's the only one in the emperor's heart. Ever since they entered the palace, Shin Yueji had always spoken to her in a calm tone. She had never been as harsh and cold as she was today. Li Yingying's words were at the tip of her tongue, but nothing came out. She knew that all of this was her own presumption, but she couldn't accept it. She hated that Shun Yueji had promised her that as long as she stayed in the harem, she would keep her safe. In the end, today, when the emperor was punishing her, not only did she not plead for mercy, she even asked the emperor to break her arms. Chapter 569. Because she didn't have any background to rely on and was despised by the emperor, even if she killed her, the emperor wouldn't say anything. Coming out of the side hall, she saw Shuangshi looking inside. Shin Yueji glanced at her indifferently. What are you looking at? What did the empress say to Li Yingying? She seems to have calmed down a lot. Nothing, just telling the truth. Saying this, she looked at Shuangshi. Why do you look so sneaky? Oh, the empress is here. Gu Yuan. Yes, when this servant came out from inside, I saw her. This servant told her that her ladyship was inside to visit Consort Ing, so she entered the hall by herself. She said that she was only looking for you to talk, and that it was nothing important. After you finished visiting Consort Ing, you can go see her. The empress. Shuangshi suddenly looked at her and lowered her voice. I think the empress is too abnormal this time. When she came to see the empress, she didn't show her fangs and claws like before. The empress? What do you think the empress is up to? Should I go to the imperial study to inform the emperor? It will save the empress from being a ghost. No need. I'm afraid she doesn't have the energy to play tricks tonight. Brushing off her hand, Shun Yueji went in first. As soon as she entered the hall, she saw Gu Yuan sitting on her main seat. She was the master of the 6 palaces after all. Shin Yueji just glanced at her, then looked away and sat on the round chair next to her. Gu Yuan didn't care about her rudeness at all. If it were before, she would feel uncomfortable, but today, she was more teasing. It's getting late. At this time, I know that the imperial concubine is injured and should rest early, but I still come to disturb my sister. I feel very sorry. Hearing this, Shin Yueji smiled. You and I know what the empress is thinking. Since you have something to say, why do you beat around the bush and say these hypocritical words? Since the empress can say it, it's another matter whether I believe it or not. Seeing her rudeness, Nanny Ding couldn't help changing her face. Nanny Ding. Gu Yuan signaled with her eyes. Although Nanny Ding was dissatisfied, she did not dare to show it. She could only wait beside Gu Yuan respectfully. However, she still couldn't help but remind her, Gu Fein Yang. My family's empress also came with sincerity. Knowing that consort Ing Yang's arms were cut off by the emperor, her heart ached and she came to visit. When Nanny Ding's words fall into my ears, do you know what they sound like? What? Gu Yuan pursed her lips and smiled. Shin Yueji sarcastically raised the corner of her mouth. It's like a cat crying crocodile tears. How did Ing Fei get injured? How did she appear in the imperial study? Where did the secret guards in the imperial study go? Why was the body of the late empress moved out of the secret chamber? Her limbs were destroyed, her head sewn up, her tongue cut, and her eyes as dark as night. Empress, don't you know all of this? What does Sister Imperial Consort mean by this? I don't understand what you're saying. Of course you don't understand, because you know this in your heart. Imperial Consort Shun, you are presumptuous. My family's empress came to visit out of goodwill, but you used this tone to mock my family's empress. Do you need me to mock the empress's actions? Chapter 570. What this consort has said is the truth. You came to find me tonight only for the sake of His Majesty. Since it's for the sake of His Majesty, then don't mention these unimportant things. His Majesty has the heart to protect you. So what can this consort do? What can Ingfei do? Compared to the power of the Gu family and court, the humiliation that Ingfei has suffered is really nothing. His Majesty won't punish you for her. Shun Guifei, you know that Bin Gong came to your Fengqi Palace once before, but was poisoned and had to recuperate in Xianghe Palace. From your tone, it seems that you think that the matter in the imperial study was caused by Bin Gong? The Empress is only recuperating. It's not like she's about to die. She can't speak. Xin Yueji sneered. There are so many servants in Xianghe Palace that you can use. In addition, you are the mistress of the inner palace. What you want to do, isn't it just a matter of a word from you? Xin Guifei, you need evidence to speak. You said that what happened to Ingfei in the imperial study is related to Bin Gong. Could it be that you are making irresponsible remarks? Bin Gong knows that you and Ingfei have a good relationship, but you cannot put the crime of her being punished by the emperor on Bin Gong's head. Bin Gong knows that she was punished by the emperor and deeply sympathizes with her. That's why I came to see her. But you, Bin Gong, is not making irresponsible remarks about the empress, nor is it slander. As for why I said that this matter is related to the empress, it is because a servant from your Xianghe Palace came to pass a message that the emperor was handling official business in the imperial study and had a headache. At this point, she looked at Gu Yuan. She saw that Gu Yuan was pretending to be calm. Even though she was trying her best to maintain her composure, it was still too easy for Shun Yueji to see through her. The current Gu Yuan in front of her was full of flaws. Before that servant girl came to pass the message, she personally admitted that she was a servant of your Xianghe Palace. Bin Gong's Xianghe Palace does have a lot of servants, but for this kind of matter, Bin Gong would normally send trusted aides to handle it, especially Noble Consort Shen. If Bin Gong really wanted Noble Consort Shen to accompany His Majesty, Bin Gong would definitely send Deng Momo to say it. There is no need to use a lowly servant that I have only used a few times. Gu Yuan looked at her. Serving His Majesty has always been this consort's job. When His Majesty had a headache, this consort had always been by his side to serve him. Furthermore, Bin Gong has received news that the emperor is not in the imperial study. How can we get someone to pass the message to Noble Consort Shen and let Noble Consort Shen accompany the emperor? In addition, Noble Consort Shen, you are already injured. All of you probably don't even remember her appearance clearly, so how would you know her name? Why don't I remind Her Majesty and Nanny Deng again and introduce this maidservant's background to you? This girl's name is Qiu Lian, and she's from Huayang. She was sold into the palace by her father at the age of 7. When she was 10, she caught the eye of a steward in the palace because of her delicate appearance, eloquence, and intelligence. At the age of 14, I was sent to the Empress Xianghe Palace to be on duty. The people that the Empress trusts are all her trusted aides. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.